I'm Ashton Addison from Blockwest Capital for Investment Pitch Media, and today on the Crypto Coin Show we have Daniela Barbosa, the Executive Director at the Hyperledger Foundation. Daniela, welcome to the show, and thank you for taking the time.
Absolutely, Ashton. It's great to be here. Thank you for having us.
You're very welcome. Excited to dive back into Hyperledger. We've had the team on the show before, and a lot has happened in all of crypto, and I know Hyperledger's done a lot since then with adoption, enterprise institutions. I'm excited to hear what the team's been working on. I'd love to start off our conversation by just hearing a little bit about your role as the Executive Director at Hyperledger and also your work with the Linux Foundation, and then we'll dive into all the details.
Absolutely. So my name is Daniela Barbosa. I serve as the Executive Director of the Hyperledger Foundation. I've been with Hyperledger since 2017, so I've seen the cycles, the highs and lows as well since then. So I think, obviously a lot of what the Hyperledger Foundation and our community worldwide has been working on over the last 7 years it has really been, tied to the enterprise market and how we see things. I also serve as the General Manager at the Linux Foundation for blockchain and identity projects. So we have various projects at the Linux Foundation. These are all open source projects that are addressing, blockchain and blockchain related technologies outside of the Hyperledger Foundation as well. For example, we just launched last month a new project called the Open Wallet Foundation, which is about creating a digital wallet open engine that is obviously so critical to Web3 and to our digital activities around both digital and offline access as well. So it's been really fantastic drive for me since 2017, and I think that might be around the time we last spoke to the Crypto Coins Show folks. But it's certainly been a ride, and we're happy to be leading the way.
Definitely, and that's great to hear about the wallets. I feel like that infrastructure is going to be the key to enabling the next tens of millions of people into cryptocurrency, and they definitely need an upgrade in the wallets and user adoption and things like that. But when I think personally of Hyperledger, I often think of the enterprise and the institutional adoption side of it. And you don't often hear about the intricacies and the details. You hear, big partnership, big company here and there. So I want to dive into that side of it to kick off the conversation. Can you just talk a little bit about Hyperledger, how they're helping enable enterprise adoption and some of those big partners that the foundation is working with?
So in 2016 was when the Hyperledger, at the time it was actually called the Hyperledger Project, was formed at the Linux Foundation. And obviously we all know what was happening in 2016. There was a lot of interest, obviously, in both the public blockchain, primarily with Bitcoin and with Ethereum starting up. But enterprises really understood that the distributed ledger technology and smart contracts and the techniques that decentralized networks were using would be beneficial to new business models, to building efficiency into their existing business models. So in 2016, 2017, many companies came together, and these were large companies like IBM and Intel and Accenture, DTCC, and many, many more that came together and said, what we really need is a place to collaboratively build these code projects that then, enterprises, organizations, and government entities can use. So really important to these types of companies and these kinds of use cases is making sure that these open source projects are enterprise grade. That they are not just open source, and we'll talk about this maybe a little bit later on, but also collaboratively developed in an open development way. And there's a big difference in that, in how open source projects have done. I think we're all in agreement, and maybe Ashton, you can tell me if you disagree, that open source has won when it comes to blockchain and decentralized development, right? You can't really have blockchain projects that are not open source, right? The code needs to be taken a look at. And more, how do you build those code projects also with open development practices as well? So since 2016, our first project was Hyperledger Fabric, which is still one of the most adopted permissioned distributed ledger frameworks in the enterprise. And I could talk a bit about that. But since then, we now actually have 16 different projects that are very diverse because we know this, the market has evolved, right? The needs for blockchain, for distributed ledger technologies, for digital identity technologies that we address here here at the Hyperledger Foundation has changed. And we have been very happy about, making those markets and actually leading the market in the enterprise use of these technologies.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah, it's expanded a lot since I remember when Fabric was sort of the main thing, and now it's like the market has expanded so much, and there's so much more enterprise interest 5 years later that, and I expect it to continue to grow. And I'm glad that you mentioned about the open source governance. I feel like that's super important, obviously, and I agree that I think it's one in blockchain, and it is the future. However, when we look at enterprises and permission chains, permissionless chains, I feel like some of them are. There's that conversation of, okay, some enterprises or institutions are specifically looking at closed source, or they want to keep the secrets of their company inside there. But I know open source governance is important. Can you talk more about that, on the open source governance of Hyperledger and how it sort of compares as well to other open source blockchains and projects?
Sure. I think it's really important to kind of differentiate between like a product and a platform that is built using open source code, right? And, there is, that application layer could be proprietary, could also be open and openly developed and available, but it could be proprietary. Open source does not prohibit companies from having proprietary software built on top of it. It doesn't prohibit companies from building businesses that are very lucrative for them on top of the open source code bases as well. The Linux Foundation, for the viewers who are not familiar with the Linux Foundation for the last 20 plus years has been building and hosting open source projects across the industry, really across different types of industry use cases. Obviously, the initial project was the Linux kernel, hence the name, the Linux Foundation. And today we run about 800 different open source projects. We have, over 17,000 contributing organizations. These are companies that are contributing code, anything from bug fixes to requirements, and really, so 17,000 worldwide communities or companies contributing code. And today, across all our Linux Foundation projects, over 800,000 developers are contributing code, across many projects, some in Hyperledger and then other projects as well. And I think it's really important to understand, when you're looking at building decentralized technologies, that decentralized development of these code bases is quite important. There are many companies out there that have, software that they open source. They put it on GitHub, they put an open source license, and they say, hey, now we are open source. And that's great. That's a great first step. And for them and for their business model, perhaps that works as well. When we talk about really open development and decentralized development, you want to make sure that you have the governance in place for anyone to be able to participate and contribute to those code bases, right? You have to have a process in how do you influence and how do you, have basically a seat at the table to advance those code bases as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, and great clarification on that. And you mentioned that now you've expanded out into 16 or more different projects. I'm familiar with Hyperledger Fabric, seeing Hyperledger grow over these years. I'm curious on what are some of the other main ones out of those lot that are sort of the big focuses and are being picked up by these enterprises.
Sure. So, I think, if we look at the timeline of the Hyperledger Foundation, Fabric was the first project, and there was a few other permission DLTs that came in that are still well adopted and used in enterprise use cases. And, for example, Hyperledger Sawtooth and Iroha. In 2017, one of the projects that we brought in was Indy, which is focused on digital identity. So it's a framework specifically for building digital identity frameworks and networks. And out of that project also came Aries and Anon Creds, which are two projects addressing decentralized identity in the marketplace. And both of those come in the time frame. So we see a lot of adoption of Hyperledger tech in decentralized identity, or decentralized identity depends on what you want to call self-sovereign identity use cases. So for example, in Europe, a lot of the digital credentialing networks that are being built are built using Hyperledger technologies. Also in Canada, some great work with the government of British Columbia. And I'm proud to say, the government of British Columbia is actually really leading the way in how to use decentralized technologies for providing digital identity projects for their citizens. Just recently, they also put a digital identity wallet, I think one of the first that was actually developed by the government itself, right? It's not a vendor coming in. And they're code contributors. We have maintainers from the government of British Columbia that are part of our code projects as well. So digital identity, certainly, and we have various projects that are addressing that. In 2019, we, and prior to that as well, we knew that the Ethereum ecosystem was going to be quite important. And we had an EVM client early on, but in 2019, Consensus, the company with the Y, contributed a code base called Hyperledger Besu. And today, Besu is being adopted not only as a permission network in some of the largest financial services and banking networks, tokenization networks, but also as an Ethereum mainnet client. So you can run Besu as an execution client, and it's I think it's number 4 right now in the execution client list. And for the Ethereum Foundation and the Ethereum ecosystem, having client diversity on mainnet is very important. And we are very honored to have Besu as part of one of the projects that we have here as well. So we're addressing identity. We're addressing, obviously Ethereum compatibility, and also, as the market matures and these technologies are being put into place, there's 2 other things that are really important. If you look at our project portfolio, are addressing it. One is interoperability. Right. We all know it's not going to be one blockchain to rule them all. There's going to be networks of networks, and enterprises need to participate in multiple networks. So how do you address interoperability? We have a project called Cacti that does just that. And it's really about creating basically connectors so that developers are not building the same connectors over and over and over again for interoperability between blockchains. And this could be permission blockchains. So you can have a Fabric and a Corda, or you can have a Fabric and a Quorum, or you can have a Besu and a public net as well. So lots of interesting work there going on interoperability. And the last piece is really about how enterprises, because it is expanding, right? It's not just those geeks anymore in the enterprise sitting in a corner in the research and development and innovation group doing development for blockchain, is what kind of tools are needed for companies to really move forward very quickly in their adoption of blockchain. So we have projects like Bevel, which is, an accelerator to get networks launched, and projects like Firefly that are really addressing kind of that application layer, like how do you not have to build the same thing, the middleware layer over and over again, and you can really focus on the application side. So I think, I'm really, not only excited about the portfolio of projects that we've built out, but really how it is enabling enterprises to adopt the things at the stage that they're at, right? And each enterprise and kind of each industry is in a different stage.
Mm-hmm. Wow, so many great points to cover, Daniela. And what you mentioned there about the decentralized identity, especially with the governments and in British Columbia, that's great to hear. And I feel like that really ties into, the wallet infrastructure. If you're going to have a wallet, you're going to want to have an identity attached to it. And having both of those come out in a seamless way that has a low barrier to entry will really be able to onboard people that have no idea about crypto or finance and things like that into the world of Web3.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it is about creating, for us here at both Hyperledger, and we have projects like Aries and AnonCreds that are already leading the way in digital identity wallets and projects, as I mentioned before. But it's really about creating those code bases, right? The open source engine, let's say, for a digital wallet. And digital wallets, obviously, very often when I talk to people about digital wallets, the first thing that they go to is crypto. Right? Crypto and the usability on the crypto wallet. The reality is that digital wallets are so critical to us in enabling things like metaverse, right? And being able to go from place to place to place with our identity and the assets that we own, right? Whether it's an NFT or maybe whether it's an experience that, one of the brands, the large brands has given us, like how do I take that identity and how do I take those assets that I own from place to place to place, and creating an experience from the user perspective that's easy for them to do. Obviously, payments, and it's not just the crypto payments, but traditional payments and banks are very interested in making sure that digital wallets, are interoperable, that are multi-purposed as well. And I think across the board, I was just at Mobile Web Congress last week, which is the largest telecommunications industry conference, really talking about how the telecom industry is addressing things like digital wallets and identity. And, something it's not, they didn't wake up last week and started thinking about it. They've been working on this for a long time. And it's pretty interesting, on the technology front, how blockchain and digital identity technologies we here at the Hyperledger have been working on for the last 7 years are really in the middle or driving a lot of those conversations.
Mm-hmm. That's great to hear. And yeah, often people think about, the payments or the crypto or even traditional payments, but I feel like one of the major pain points in Web 2 is just having a million different accounts on different websites with different emails and different passwords and different password managers. And it's just a big cluster. I feel like digital identity or some Web3 solution will solve all of that and make sure that, we can just log in with the same account across the entire internet.
Yeah. People have been working on this for a long time. I actually got involved in, the blockchain space in very early in 2007, specifically around digital identity. I actually was part of a project very early on called the Data Portability Project. And it was about owning your user identity and the data that you were creating. This was before the Facebooks of this world started taking everybody's data, and being able to take that data, once again, it's my data, and being able to have the ability to disclose the data, right, and the information about me that is needed at that point, right? And that is a lot of, the things like, DIDCOMs, like how do you make sure that only the pieces of data that you explicitly say, I want to provide to this network or to the system or to this, different experience I'm going to. So yeah, I think you're right on. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. The governments are getting involved, right? Because there is regulation, and take a look at some of the work that Europe is doing specifically with EDS around digital identity. And you'll see kind of where technology is going to enable what I believe is a better future if we do it right, of course.
Definitely. And now I'm curious with Hyperledger, being close to the enterprise side and having more knowledge about what the institutions and enterprises are interested in, looking at 2022 as the year of crypto and the prices going down and FTX, all these other crashes of these major companies, I'm guessing that, that hasn't swayed the interest in enterprise. Was there any sort of negative fallbacks on the enterprise side from any of the collapses or bad things that happened in Web3 throughout 2022 that you're aware of?
Yeah, the good news is, unlike in 2017, where the enterprise market was not educated about the difference between blockchain and crypto at the time, right, during the whole ICO bust, I think we're definitely better positioned here. But there's been, a lot of it has been actually mainstream media really conflating, because they don't understand the difference that blockchain is not crypto, right? Crypto is just applications that are built on top of using blockchain technologies as well. So I do think that the market's a bit more educated in the fact that what blockchain technology actually is. But there always, there's obviously always, backlash, right, when something big happens. The reality is, right, we were talking about ETH Denver before, at ETH Denver, they had this toilet paper with SBF's face on it, right? The reality is, things like FTX had nothing to do with technology. Those are, it's pure fraud and bad business, right? Which happens across any industry. Yeah, I could probably point to every single industry has had a huge failure when it comes to fraud and bad business practices at the operational level. So, I do think that there's been, an ability for companies and organizations who've been building using blockchain. And I think you've seen this, especially in financial services, right? And the big banks coming out and talking about the fact that, they are using blockchain for very, big and important tokenization projects. You see central banks coming out and talking about specifically the work that they're doing with central bank digital currencies, right? These are all about the technology, not about the, the fraud and the speculative nature of crypto. Maybe next time will happen, and I guarantee you, Ashton, it's going to happen again. We'll even be in better position, right? More people will be educated that it's not the tech.
Yeah, good point, Daniela. And you mentioned there about CBDCs. With all this discussion around enterprises, institutions, and governments as well, getting interested in the technology, I would think that the next logical step from the digital wallet and the digital identity is the digital currency nationalized as well. I'm curious if Hyperledger is playing a role in that, or working with governments, regulators on bringing out something at the right time with the right technology.
Yeah, so certainly our community is. So a couple of things. I think, close to 115 central banks today are working on different central bank digital currencies or digital currency projects, right? And this really goes across the board. Some are DLTs, some have distributed ledger technologies as core to what they're either rolling out in production or experimenting with, and some don't, right? So there's going to be different approaches to how these central banks do it. For about 2.5, close to 3 years, we've been spending a lot of time working with central banks and the private sector to do education, back to my starting point around open source and open development, and why that's important, especially when building critical financial infrastructure that is going to be with us for a very, very long time, right? You don't want to build that with proprietary code that is going to be beholden to one vendor or to one vendor community. So it's really important for us to do that education, and we spent a lot of time. Early on in 2017, we had, for example, the Boston Fed and the Bank of England join the Hyperledger Foundation as members, and they've always been participants and kind of, having a seat at the table around the distributed ledger technology conversation. Just recently, we welcomed the Banque de France, as well as the Bank of Nigeria, and both of those have pretty advanced central bank digital currency projects, one in production and one in pilot, that are using Hyperledger, in their case, Hyperledger Fabric. Hyperledger Besu is also being used in other projects worldwide. And even we have a project called Iroha, Hyperledger Iroha, that was one of the first retail CBDCs rolled out in Bangkok. Just this week alone, the Banco do Brasil, which is the central bank of Brazil, made a huge announcement about the work that they're doing with central bank digital currencies, and what they're deploying as a pilot in 2024. And they selected Besu as the DLT that they'll use going forward. So I think we're seeing a lot of adoption. And if you look, there's a great resource with the Atlantic Council that tracks central bank digital currency implementations. And all those, many of them are Hyperledger tech in the different flavors that we have, but mostly Fabric and Besu as well. We actually have an upcoming workshop that the Banque de France is doing with IBM as their technology partner here for Hyperledger. It will be a free workshop around how to build central bank digital currencies. And we encourage, the smaller countries, right, who might not have the resources to do a lot of this, long-term experimentation to join those kind of things. And that's the education that we do to do that. And last but not least, back to the open source. I'm all about open source and code. Getting these banks to also find a place to contribute the code, right? Don't create the same code projects over and over again. That's very costly and it slows down the world. So how do we make sure? So last year we did launch a collaboration with Hyperledger, with the Digital Dollar Project, and Finos, which is another Linux Foundation project focused on financial services, open source projects. That's called the Open Digital Currency Initiative. And that will be a place for central banks and their private sector partners to bring code into and to work collaboratively on that code, so that we can build these things faster and better as well.
Mm-hmm. Incredible. That's a lot of collaboration in countries from all around the world, realizing that this is the future and they need to do it right, and in some way, take it slow and make sure you don't rush it, but also don't be the last country in the world to adopt it as well.
Exactly.
So,
yeah, and I'm just honored that the Hyperledger Foundation has become a place for these types of organizations worldwide to come and work together, because that they certainly need a place to work on code together as well.
Incredible, Daniela. And with all this, these different discussions and different parts of Hyperledger that we're talking about, what is the best way for people to learn more and read more into the parts that they're interested in with what the Hyperledger is working on and all of this?
So, we are an open source community, so all are welcome. There's lots of different opportunities, from business people to obviously developers. We are a developer community. You can go to hyperledger.org. There, for example, we have over 30 case studies, and these are production or late pilot stage case studies around different industry use cases. Some fantastic use cases, like, for example, Circular, which is doing supply chain tracking from electronic vehicle batteries, and there's a lot of regulation coming down a pipe on that. There's some really great case studies that I would recommend people to go and look. We have ongoing, on a daily basis, we have meetups. We have over 80,000 people participating in our meetup community, and you can catch a meetup at any time on any topic that is of interest to you. Many that I haven't hit upon today. There is also strong special interest groups, as well as obviously the project communities as well. So recommend, going to hyperledger.org, follow us on Twitter, on LinkedIn to see kind of the updates and the webinars and the meetups that we have, and join us. Open source, this is your invitation to come join us. Everyone is welcomed. Lurk around if you want for the beginning, and reach out to staff. I'm available, and as is the rest of my staff, to really support our community. So I look forward to seeing everybody there.
Incredible. Thank you so much, Daniela. I will leave those links in the description box below as well. All the best with everything with the Hyperledger Foundation and Linux Foundation moving forward, and let's follow up in the near future.
Awesome. You got it, Ashton. Thank you.